Welcome to Madlik. My name is Geoffrey Stern, and at Madlik we light a spark or shed some light on a Jewish text or tradition. Along with Rabbi Mintz, we host Madlik Disruptive Torah on Clubhouse every Thursday night and share it as the Madlik podcast on your favorite platform. This week's portion is Korach. The sense that Korach's rebellion has something to do with correct governance and even democracy comes into our mind. It's just not clear what the message is and whose side we're on. So join us as we survey classical Jewish and philosophical literature on Korach and the enigma of democracy. I'm currently in Greece and Rabbi Mintz is in New York, so join us for The People versus Korach. Well, welcome, Rabbi, in New York. I am in Lefkada, Greece. I was sitting over dinner, and I was sitting with one of my cousins who is an archaeologist, and we were looking at what we thought was Ithaca, and the discussion came up that maybe the island that we're on is actually Ithaca. So I am literally in the ancient source of Greek philosophy, and it did dawn on me that I'm going from here to Israel. If you look at between Israel, which gave the world the Jewish Christian, gave Christianity and Muslim, billions of people a belief system, and the Greeks, the ancient Greeks, who gave us philosophy, mathematics, logic, it's almost overwhelming. And nonetheless, I can sit on the beach and enjoy myself. How good is that?
That is the best. That's amazing.
So, every week you look at the Parsha and you say, how does it affect me and how is my read this year going to be different? And boy, oh boy, I mean, we have discussed the revolution, the revolt of Korach before. But sitting here in Greece and thinking it as the source of what we call today democracy, it's an amazing moment to be looking at a Korach. And I have to say, the first place I went was I Googled Korach and Philo. Philo Judaeus was the great Jewish philosopher who lived in Greece, and that took me to other Greek thinkers, and Josephus, who I always thought was Roman, but turns out really thought like a Greek. So we are going to go on a little journey. We're almost going to go island hopping tonight. So do you have your life vest and you ready to come?
I'm ready.
Okay, so we are in Numbers 16, and it says, now Korach, son of Izhar, son of Kohath, son of Levi. It really, the importance of his yichus, of who he came from, comes through really clearly. He betook himself along with Datan and Aviram, sons of Eliab, and Ansan and Peleth, and descendants of Reuben. So really the stage is already set. We got the descendants of the tribe of Levi. We have the descendants of Reuben, the firstborn. And they come to rise up against Moses, together with 250 Israelites, chieftains of the community, chosen in the assembly, men of repute, Nisiei Edah, Karei Moed Anshe Shem. Anshe Shem means people of great name. They combined against Moses and Aaron and said to them, you have gone too far, for all the community are holy. The Hebrew is just beautiful. Rav lochem ki kol ha'ida kulam kedoshim. You know, at this point, every modern who believes in democracy, their eyes open up and they go, this guy Korach, he's standing up to the man. He is saying that it belongs to all of us. Whether that turns out to be the case or not, we certainly have set the stage of the discussion. We are going to be talking about correct governance. We are going to be talking about democracy tonight. Am I wrong, or is the stage set?
No, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about governance. We're talking about democracy. And it's interesting, Korach's position, because Korach's position isn't such a bad position. The question is why he's rejected.
Yeah. So it goes on and it says, we're all holy, all of them, and God is in their midst. Why then do you raise yourselves above God's congregation? When Moses heard this, he fell on his face. He's been doing that a lot lately. He's just flabbergasted. The pivot of the Israelites from being redeemed by this great leader and turning on him just every time they cut at his gut. Then he spoke to Korach and his company and said, come in the morning. And he basically tells them, let's see who God is with. Fill up a pan of incense. Let's bring it in front of God and let's see who he answers. But then he ends and says, you have gone too far, sons of Levi. Rav lechem b'nei Levi. So now we're kind of getting into the weeds. Both of them are making an argument to the other that you have overreached, you have stepped beyond your bound. So it truly is not a one-sided argument. And as I said in the intro, we know they're talking about democracy. We just aren't clear whose side we're on or where this is going. So it goes on, and the notes are attached. But as I said, I went ahead and the first thing I Googled, because I'm in Greece, is I wanted to know what a Greek Jewish thought leader would say. And so I found an article by Louis H. Feldman from Yeshiva University, and it's called The Context of the Korach Narrative, Philo's Interpretation of Korach. So the first thing that is something that comes up all the time is, what is the context of this? Many of us, and in years past, we've told those midrashic stories where Korach shows up in a talit shekulo techelet. Him and 250 members of his movement make a major fashion statement. They make the argument, if a piece of patil techelet, a little thread of techelet, can make a whole article of clothing kosher, so then if we are holy techelet, why do we need a leader like you? And we've dwelt with that, but that comes out of the fact that the parsha of Korach is right next to the ending of last week's parsha that dealt with the tzitziot, with the four-cornered garments. But it turns out it's not as clear-cut as that. Josephus says it comes immediately after the abortive attempt of the Israelites to attack Amalek and the Canaanites against the advice of Moses. And hence the connecting link is the Israelite disobedience toward their great leader. So this is perfect for Madlik, because last week that's how we ended. We talked about the Jabotinsky Zionists who focused on those Jews who maybe failed in the beginning, but then said, okay, we don't want to die in the desert. We want to go into the land of Israel. And they launched an attack, not only disregarding reality and strategic logic, but even disregarding Moses and God. And since next week you are going to be doing Madlik Disruptive Torah with Avram Bernstein, I saw a tweet that he put in this week. And he wrote, it's easy to write Korach off as a rich, entitled, only I can fix it, faux populist. But the truth is that Moses' leadership had just condemned an entire generation to death in the wilderness. So Rav Bernstein follows Josephus in terms of the context is it comes after this attack. Philo, on the other hand, puts it in a totally different context. The interesting thing about Philo, according to Feldman, is that number one, he never mentions Korach by name. And number two, he puts it together with two times he treats it, both times it's next to the sin of the golden calf, which is where the firstborn lost all their rights, and their rights were transferred to the tribe of Levi, but in a sense, both the tribe of Levi and then within the tribe of Levi, the subsection of Kohanim. And so from Philo's point of view, according to Feldman, and I'll stop here to discuss a little more, What he's saying is this is not about, number one, personalities for Philo. This is about what Philo calls ochlocracy, which is chaos. The worst of all forms of government is the very counterfeit of democracy, which is the best of them, according to Philo. But the anarchy of offspring is anarchy. And so what Philo does by, number one, eliminating Korach's name, according to Feldman, is to take the name and the focus away from it and make it to chaos, anarchy against order as represented by Moses. And the other thing that he does is he moves it all into it's because of the sin of the golden calf. It has to do a lot with the tribe of Levi and kind of intra-tribal fights, but it's basically Korach against God.
Yeah, well, let's take one thing at a time. The first thing is that he never mentions Korach. Korach is not important for Philo. It's what it represents. It's like you said, the intra-tribal battle within Levi and how it relates to God, but Korach himself is not important. That's why it's put next. You see, it's an interesting trick to put it next to the golden calf, because the golden calf was arguably the worst sin that the Jews committed in history. And by putting it there, it elevates the type of sin or the type of, the type of rebellion that's going on. They're both similar kinds of rebellion. Last week, we learned about the spies. The spies did the wrong thing, but they weren't rebelling because they weren't presenting an alternative, right? In the golden calf, you have an alternative, the calf. With Korach, you have an alternative, Korach. With the spies, you don't have an alternative. So it's not a rebellion in the same way.
Yes, absolutely. So what I was surprised by, even though the article by Feldman is about Philo, what I was surprised by was what Josephus says. And I always thought of Josephus as a Roman general, or started as an Israelite Jewish general that switch sides, the Benedict Arnold of ancient Israel, so to speak. But obviously, Greek philosophy and Greek thought was all throughout the Near East. In the Talmud, there are so many words that are Greek, whether it's afikomen or apitropos or apikoros. So Josephus is really thinking like a Greek. So he should have been the one that I Googled, and this is what he does. He introduces Korach as one of the Hebrews who was amongst the most distinguished, both in ancestry and in wealth, and an able speaker, the most persuasive in dealing with crowds. The fact that Korach is a most efficient speaker in addressing crowds, again, makes him Moses' counterpart, writes Feldman. But this same quality also serves to associate him with the demagogues whom Thucydides and Plato denounce. So now we're starting to see in Josephus how all of a sudden, and it's not at all clear in the text of the Torah itself, that number one, Korach is wealthy. We're going to get to the Talmudic sources for that in a second.
Right.
It's not clear in the sources that he's a great orator. Sure, he makes an argument, Rav Lachem. It takes the Talmud, the Midrash, to give all of these fascinating arguments that he gives. But here, Josephus goes out of his way. According to Feldman, he's trying to build up Moses' leadership, but in order to do that, he has to make Korach into a worthy adversary. And he picks the 3 or 4 attributes that are the attributes of a great political leader in Greek philosophy in Athens. Those of us who have studied Plato, those of us who have read Thucydides and others, know that being a great orator was something that was important. Today, most of us think of, if you can give a good speech, big deal. It's what you stand for. It's who you are. But if you go to the English Parliament, you really see, we forget how big a part of democracy was made making a speech, being able to debate, being able to defend and be persuasive. So, in Thucydides, the Peloponnesian Wars, he talks about Pericles. He makes this
Right.
amazing speech, and he says, "A lover of my country, superior to money, for he hath good thoughts and cannot clearly express them, was made good to have them." When he's defending democracy, he is really putting himself against the wealthy, the people that can make the great speech. It's fascinating to see that we are using these Greek reference points to maybe, and I'm not arguing that this was the original historical Korach. We will never know who the original historical Korach is. But it's fascinating through both Josephus, but also really the Talmud that Josephus is basing it on. They make Korach into one of these landed gentries who can go ahead and show off with his superior intellect. In Bamidbar Rabbah, it says, "Now Korach took," quoting our verse, "Vayikach." Took can only be a word for attracting with persuasive words, in that he attracted all the leaders of Israel and the Sanhedrin to follow after him. Now, Korach took in that he drew their hearts with persuasive words. You almost have to understand Greek philosophy, the sophists, the whole art of speech making, to understand how the rabbis are painting Korach. It's kind of fascinating.
It's absolutely fascinating. I mean, the idea that Korach is a good speaker, of course, plays against Moshe, who is not a good speaker, who's a stutterer. So every piece of the rebellion is playing on the weaknesses of Moshe. Probably, you see, this is a little off from what Feldman's talking about, but it's an important discussion. And that is what led Korach to rebel at this point. Means nothing, there's nothing new in what Korach says. Why didn't Korach rebel right when they crossed the sea? Why didn't he rebel immediately? It might be that he saw a weakness in Moshe, because last week was the report of the spies. Maybe he saw that Moshe was weak in his leadership, and he thought this was a perfect moment to actually rebel against Moshe. I think that needs to be considered also.
I mean, I think there's so much discussion of when this happened. And of course, we all know the principle, Ein Mukdamu Mucha b'Torah, that just because it's placed in this particular chapter, we already have authorities that say it happened after the golden calf, authorities that say it happened after the spies and tzitzit, after. So it is fascinating to think of the context, but I was fascinated by the broader context of putting it into the Greek argument for democracy, where the argument against the democracy by the oligarchs was that we are wiser and we are wealthier, meaning to say, how did they use wealth? We are stakeholders. You are not stakeholders. This demos of the democracy was really, it was like your districts. It was the districts in Athens, and it came about because everybody fought the war, so why shouldn't everybody have a vote? But let's go back to what else the Talmud says about Korach that kind of parallels the Greek idea of these great leaders, but does not appear at all in the text. In Sanhedrin 110a, it says, with regard to the verse, wealth is kept for the owner to his detriment. Reish Lakish says this is referring to the wealth of Korach, which was of no use to him. The fact that Korach was wealthy is derived from the verse, and all the substance was at their feet. Rabbi Eliezer says this is referring to a person's property which stands him on the feet. The keys alone to Korach's treasury was a burden. And where did he get the money? Rabbi Chama, son of Rabbi Hanina, said Joseph concealed 3 buried treasures in Egypt. One was revealed to Korach, and that's where he got his money. He he discovered some money in Egypt and took it out. But again, it's very hard to see what the connection is with Korach. If you Google it, there's one opinion that says in our Parsha, when the earth swallowed him up, it took him and his possessions. So this was clearly somebody whose possessions meant something to him, but guess what? It's just not there. It took the rabbis and then Josephus to put it all together, both a great orator, a great man of wealth, to basically typecast Korach into this defender of the status quo, and to go against Pericles, who in his great speech talks about redistributing wealth and how no man should lose his property. I mean, some of it actually echoes what Moses did. And it makes you, and this really struck me, Rabbi, we need Korach to make us realize what a revolution Moses led. We need a Korach or an oligarch talking to Pericles to let us know how radical a departure it was that every 7 years the loans are returned, and every 49 years every land was returned. This was just revolutionary because it was, I would never say that Moses was preaching democracy, but it certainly was something that was against the landed gentry. And of course, the third issue here is what about the children of Reuven? You have the children, Korach comes from Levi, and of course they feel that they were given certain rights. Why aren't those rights spread throughout the tribe? But then the tribe of Reuven comes. Reuven was the firstborn, and Reuven is making a similar argument about why was his birthright taken away from him. So we really have...
Same argument, right? Is that we have it coming to us. You like to say in Hebrew, Magia li.
Yeah. They were entitled. They were the entitled class, and Moses and Pericles were disrupting everything. So as I love to always talk about the Israeli vernacular, we've talked in past years how you can say to somebody in Israel, you think you are a talitchet kulo techelet, which is basically a way of saying that you are holier than thou. But you can also say that you are ashir kekorach, you are rich as Korach. So this piece of Talmud that Josephus quotes has lasted the test of history, and there are, as I said before, various different theories as to how Korach got this attribution of wealth. And the most fascinating one that I found is one that says that if you Google the phrase rich as Croesus, you will see that there was a grandson of Medius. Remember the guy who touched anything and it became gold? So he had a grandson who was very rich and was a king, and there was an expression, rich as Croesus. And one theory is that either it was lost in translation, that Croesus became Korach, or what I really think would have happened would be there was a common phrase in Hellenistic society that spread throughout the Near East, that if somebody was very rich, you say he was rich like Croesus. And some guy, maybe around the week in June when they're reading Parshat Korach, came up with a good one. He says, rich like Croesus, rich like Korach. And it stuck. But anyway, here was another connection between our Parsha and our story in the Bible and Greek literature that I could not mention.
That's great. I love it. Now, what do you think? Why do you think rich like Korach, Ashir Korach? Why do you think that retained its its usage? What do you think that's the significance of that is?
So I think, and this is one of the strange things that came up. Didn't make it into the source sheet, but at one point Korach says, "Why do you give the Jews such difficult commandments?" And the example of the commandment that he brings is the techelet, the putting on the purple dye on the tzitziot. And of course, every one of us scratches our head because we know there are very many difficult commandments out there. And putting on tzitziot is not one of them. It's pretty easy to do. Give me a hard one. But if you think about it, and in past podcasts I have mentioned this, the truth is, from an economic point of view, techelet was very expensive. And I think that maybe you need to look at these arguments as arguments of economics. That Korach is coming here and he is trying to win over the populace. And he is trying to say that, number one, he's complaining that Moses is now taxing all of the Jewish people to give Ma'aser and Truma to the Levites. And he is also saying, and now you have this commandment of putting this very expensive dye onto your four corners. Why is Moses robbing the people? And the truth is, he isn't the first politician who calls the kettle black, which is that he truly is trying to retain all of the status that he has and the property that he has. And he can't stand that Moses, in effect, has created this amazing new legislature that really protects the poor in so many ways. And we've covered them in the last few weeks about interest and about returning land. So I think it is a very
and the Jubilee year, right?
Yeah,
we talked about
it's an economic argument, right. And I think that Korach being rich really enters into this argument when you push down. That's my read on it anyway.
Yeah, okay. I mean, that's a very interesting thing, that the fact that Korach is rich, the fact that Korach is a good speaker, is an orator, is really at the base of the whole rebellion. Now, the reason that's so interesting is because neither of those ideas appear in the text, right? So the rabbis have really identified a different piece that's not explicit, but they understand rebellion in a certain way.
There's that, and then there's also, and this I think is key, is that they are bringing the discussion up to date. They are bringing it up into their time. They are clearly aware, whether in the Talmud or in the time of Josephus, of what's going on in the world of ideas, in the world of political science. And they are literally updating this discussion to the discussion that they are having in their day. And, I think part of the takeaway from tonight is this is the starting point of any discussion that needs to be had about what is best practices in terms of ruling. I have a few other sources, and I'd like to go through them kind of
they're
quickly.
great. Okay, you take them away.
So,
Go.
As I said, one of the books that I started reading that I found was so amazingly interesting is a book that is called Setting the People Free by John Donne. And basically what he says is that democracy, when it first came out, was a particularistic law that had to do with Athens. It had to do with the demos, which is really districts in Athens. And then it lied dormant for 1,000 years at least. If anything, people like Plato and Aristotle thought that it was a terrible way to govern because it took the mean, the lowest common denominator to govern, and they believed in philosopher kings and all sorts of stuff. But when it started to come back, there were two great thinkers that brought it back. One was our buddy Spinoza, and in Spinoza treats the story of Korach, and he brings in Ezekiel, believe it or not. And I'd like to believe that Spinoza studied in a cheder, he studied in the yeshiva. These things did not come out of nowhere. And he says, at the center of Spinoza's explanation for the dissolution of the Hebrew state lies his interpretation of two extraordinary verses in Ezekiel. And Ezekiel says, moreover, I gave them statutes which were not good, and laws by which they would not live. For I defiled them with their own gifts by rejecting everything which opened the womb, so that I might destroy them, that they might know that I am God. So he takes this argument of Korach even further, where Korach says giving the law of the tzitzit was too overwhelming and overpowering. And he makes the argument that Korach's whole argument was against all of these biblical rules that God placed on the Jewish people as a punishment. And he takes license to say that from this verse in Ezekiel that he quotes. So in a sense, what Korach is arguing for is that we have been punished with all of these rules. Rav lachem, you have added much more onto this. And at the end of the day, and this is a fascinating sense of where Spinoza comes from, he says that he takes Korach's side almost and says that Korach is ultimately arguing for democracy. And as all of you know, in Spinoza's mind, the whole world is in the mind of God. And what he sees in democracy as the whole society is in the mind of every man, which I think is a powerful kind of vision. He says it's a union of minds, anoramim unio, which does not make sense under the Commonwealth itself, but aims toward a higher degree. So the other a thought leader that I want to mention is Hobbes. And Hobbes' argument is that when he treats Korach, he says that Korach was premature, meaning to say that when you found this union, you need a strong leader. And Moses was that leader. Yet that to be understood of the succession after Moses should be dead. For whoever ordereth and establisheth the policy as a first leader of a commonwealth, be it monarchy, aristocracy, or democracy, needs to have sovereign power. So what he argues is that Korach was too soon, that Korach was trying to undermine Moses, but we needed a strong leader like Moses to establish this amazing source of government. And as a result, he says that after Moses was to die, that's when Korach would be good. And a modern thought leader called Michael Walzer wrote a book, and he said he takes Korach's argument as the argument against the monarchy. And again, he's saying the same thing. We needed a king like Moses to start to found us, but then after Moses is dead, when you get to Samuel and the people want a king, God says, why have a king when you can have me? So these amazing arguments all come up, and they all come up using our Bible. The fascinating thing,
our story of Korach.
I do, and one of the reasons, according to the historians, that it was during Hobbes and Spinoza that the arguments about democracy came about was it was then that the Christian Bible was translated into the vernacular. You know, we focus so much on how Mendelssohn translated the Bible into German, and that created the whole revolution, the Enlightenment. I've never seen an argument here, and we should have thought about it, but when the Bible, Old and New Testaments, were translated into the vernacular so that people could read the King James Bible, and they could see and read stories like Korach, they could read laws such as the Jubilee and the laws against interest. noticed that they could start questioning their leaders. And that is a fascinating piece of information.
That is fascinating. That's a whole other discussion about the translation of the Bible into the vernacular, and people were actually burned. Tyndale was burned because he translated the Bible into English. But that's for another time. Thank you so much, Geoffrey. Thank you for taking time from your vacation in Greece. Enjoy this amazing week. Enjoy the boat. Maybe we'll see you next Thursday. But for everybody else, come to I will be with Rabbi Alpern Bronstein, and we will be talking about Parshat Chukat. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Be well.
Shabbat Shalom from Greece, where I am in Greece. I'm going to Israel. In both countries, we are still having podcasts, having discussions about our ancient texts. And that, more than anything, makes for eternity and for the continuity of man's search for meaning, man's search for the good and the right. And it's just a privilege to speak with you all and to welcome the Shabbat with you all and to read about Korach with you all. So Shabbat Shalom. And
Shabbat Shalom and enjoy.
Can't wait till next week to hear you, Rabbi Adam and Rabbi Bronstein, do Disruptive Torah.